and welcome to Immediate Immersion Live. How is everybody doing today? If you're watching on the replay, feel free to ask any questions in the comments below. If you're watching us live, go ahead and use the chat. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Today, we are talking about immersive classroom environment. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion Live, where we're all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. Today we're talking about an immersive environment. So I want to first differentiate that from immersion instruction. Immersion instruction is where you are 100% speaking in the target language. You cannot use the common language in any way, shape, or form in the classroom. That is against the rules. You have to make yourself comprehensible through any other means, which often leads to confusion. Different, pictures can mean different things to different people. Gestures can mean different things to different people. And somewhere where I noticed where immersion lagged behind comprehensible input, where we use an immersive environment, which we'll talk about in just a moment, was I observed two classes in Japanese in Alaska. One was using CI and one was using immersion. The immersion kids had been in class since kindergarten, and now we're in high school. So somewhere in the 9th, 10th grade, I think, was the class I was observing. And they had no English exposure at all in that class. So if they didn't understand exactly what a word meant, that word stayed foggy until it came clear, if it ever came clear. And some of those concepts, they never really understood, or they may have misunderstood what that word meant because there was no, this is what it means exactly. Where in a comprehensible input classroom, we do use the common language, whatever that language might be, to get quick and dirty to the actual meaning of the word. If need be, we use other things as well. We use pictures, we use gestures, but sometimes the quickest, easiest way to comprehension and making it comprehensible is just to use L1 or the common language. And with immersion, that's not possible. It's against the rules of immersion. And some of the kids were left behind that we weren't sure how much they were actually understanding. And so in some of the elements towards proficiency in Japanese, the CI kids were ahead of the immersion kids. Now, Stephen Krashen used to fight Blaine Ray. Blaine Ray was the inventor of TPRS, Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling. And Stephen Krashen is where we got the whole comprehensible input idea from. And he was the co-inventor of natural language approach. His idea was absolutely, positively, no translation whatsoever. Period. No reason. Don't do it. And I remember I was in a methods class, and they were showing us the natural approach. And although I understood the language, I could see where confusion happened because they were doing this. And they were actually talking about hair. But were they talking about long? Was it talking about hair? Was it talking about something else? I could see where people were confused. Now this brings us back to Stephen Krashen. I heard of this story secondhand, but my friend was actually in the dinner with him. At the National TPRS Conference each year, they have something called an immersion dinner. And that is where you go by language, and only that language can be spoken. So in this one was Spanish. I didn't go to the Spanish one. I like to practice my German, plus I like German food, so I go with the German one. But whatever language you speak or one that you're learning, or one that you're teaching, you can go to one of those immersion dinners and just speak that language. Well, Stephen Krashen went to the Spanish one. And they were having a conversation completely in Spanish until the word chispa came up. And he was lost. He couldn't understand what that word was. And so they did everything they could without going into English trying to explain what chispa meant. Now, if you don't speak Spanish, chispa is a spark. I don't know in what context it came up, but it came up. They drew pictures. They did gestures. They tried talking around the word. And he was still lost. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of this, one of the teachers was so frustrated, they said, Chispa means spark. Can we please move on? And that's like our top kid who understood it the first time, and now you're spending all of this time trying to explain it, and you're losing those top kids. So you see sometimes immersion, 100% immersion doesn't work. And from then on, Stephen Krashen said, I see the benefit of limited translation. So that's the difference between immersive environment and an immersion environment. Welcome, Joanne. Joanne says, hi, Scott, I made it. I only have one student study hall tonight, so as long as she doesn't need help with her folklore essay, I'm with you. Awesome. Welcome to have you with us. We're just getting started. So that's the difference between the two. And in comprehensible input, we focus on the second one, the immersive environment. We want our input to be comprehensible because any input that's not comprehensible is noise, and nobody understands what's going on with that. You cannot learn if you don't understand. That is why we cannot just put students in front of a Spanish telenovela, and after the telenovela is over in a few months, expect them to have any knowledge of Spanish. They're not going to, because they didn't understand what was going on. The only thing that they're going to learn is how to be more dramatic. That's the whole point there. So we want to have this work with that immersive. We want to use English or whatever the common language is, however it be, in a limited fashion. We don't want to subtitle ourselves or translate everything that we're saying so that we can make sure that we're being comprehended. But you definitely don't want to do, Hallo, ich bin Scott. Hello, my name is Scott. Heute sprechen wir Deutsch. Today we're speaking German. Was hast du am Wochenende gemacht? What did you do over the weekend? We don't want to do that because kids learn to tune out the language and only listen for the translation. What we want to do is translate only what kids don't know. And that varies by kid and by level. So in level 1, I do speak 100% in the target language. But obviously, if I don't make it comprehensible, not a single kid's going to understand because it's level 1, day 1. So I do the translation piece, but I don't subtitle myself. I don't do it orally because for two reasons. One, it breaks the illusion of immersion. And two, it goes in the ear and out the other. The kids are not necessarily going to remember it. So I write it on the board. In fact, I put it in a Google Doc, one word at a time, and only the words that I'm using so they can refer back to them to understand what I'm saying. This way, I'm 100% talking in the target language. The translation is written up there, so it's not interrupting the immersion, but it's also up there to refer back to. And anytime I use a word, I make sure I point to it on my Google Doc to refresh their memory. So that way they can see how it's spelled, they can see what it means, and they can compare it with its pronunciation. So that's really, really important that you make yourself comprehended so that everybody can understand. And by getting into the language right away, you're showing kids how the grammar works. They're seeing how sentences are put together quickly and functionally. And I guess that's what I was going to say. What was I going to say? Let me check my notes here really quick. Oh, yes. In the beginning of the year for level 1, you're going to be translating every word for the first few weeks. That's every word of the. So Spanish and French have 4. German have a lot more than that for the word for the. Every verb form is going to be up there. You're not going to conjugate all the forms at once. But if I use the I form, I'm going to write the I form on the board. If I use the U form, I'm going to write the U form on the board. And just what it translates to. I'm not going to say, oh, did you notice this is the past tense? Or it's the past perfect? Or it's the future? I don't bother with that. Just the translation. But as you progress through level 1 and in level 2 and level 3 and level 4 and AP and beyond, you're going to be translating less and less and less. But it allows kids to have a wide variety of vocabulary and be exposed. Now, this is not a vocabulary list. That's not the point of this. I'm not trying to make a vocabulary list out of it. The kids do not have to memorize this vocabulary. It's just to make me comprehend it. And the stuff that is actually high frequency will be repeated over and over and over again. And it's impossible for the kids not to get that stuck in their head. So that's really the power of immersive environment that we're talking about. Sorry, my voice is really dry today. Okay, so let's talk about that language-rich environment. So, lots of things. I've already kind of talked about how to make your environment a little bit language rich. But let's start with the physical environment. You want to start with having posters around the room. Now, the posters around the room should help them stay in the target language. That can include word walls, verb charts in the way of not being where they see all the endings, but like I'll have my Sweet 16 posters up there and they're in present, past, and future so the kids can look up and see what the actual word is for I will be, or I was, or I go versus she went. They can see them, they can use them right up there. Plus, I have a word wall with lots of words that are difficult to teach, meaning I can't really use gestures. They're kind of abstract words. A lot of them are transitional words, and we can put them in on my word wall so kids can refer to those. Excuse me. So that's another way to do that. Other than those two things, I have question word posters to help kids understand the question words. Then I have rejoinder posters, different rejoinders that can be said, like, oh, what a shame, or how interesting, those kinds of things. And I also have common phrases that can be done, like, I don't understand, speak more slowly, those types of things. So kids can be immersed in the language as much as possible. You also want to think about your seating arrangements. You want your seats to be in a way that makes conversation easier. So generally that doesn't mean rows and columns, because that is everybody's talking to someone's back of their head. And that doesn't always work towards conversations. Some people will do paired groups. So they might put 4 desks together in little pods. So they have 2 kids looking at each other each way. That may work. I like to use a double horseshoe or a U shape in my classroom. That way I have limited rows. I only have 2 because I've got 34 students in my classroom. And I can get to each student. I can get really close when I want to talk to them. And everybody's not talking to heads. They are talking to the front of the room, and I can work in that middle area, walk around and talk to all the students and get a personal way in there. So when it's, just rows and columns, I can't always get to that kid in that back row. So it's more like a shouting match back and forth between us, where it's a little bit more intimate when I can only have those 2 rows. It works better for me than pods. Plus, with pods, not everybody can be facing the board, and so that can be problematic as well. So those are the 2 things physically that I want to talk about in your room to create that language-rich environment. But then you also want to do other things to make it language-rich. For example, like I said, using a translation board kind of. I use that Google Doc. I make 2 columns, and I put the Spanish word on one side and the English word on the other. Let me show you an example. Let me move to my screen share here. Bear with me a moment while I switch over and get what I want up here. Let's see. Let's open up another window. And I'll show you what one of them looks like. Okay. Let's see if I can get a Spanish one up here. Period, 6 is Spanish 1. And now let's go to share. Let's make that a little bit bigger. I don't know why it's not showing up any bigger here, but I think you can get the idea. Let me see if I can get it a little bigger though here. Google Chrome. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here you can see that I have this vocabulary. This is starting on day 1 that I used. And you can see how I wrote it in here. I've got the Spanish on one side. I've got the English on the other. I make this doc accessible to students, but look at the top. This is not a vocabulary list that you have to memorize. I just make it available for kids if they feel comfortable with it. And these are the words that came up as we talked in Spanish. And I just keep a running list for the whole year. All of the stuff. Now, so you'll see some of the words up here. I know I'm going fast through it, but I repeat it because it's a few pages back. So I need to put it back in. So, ¿cuál es tu equipo favorito? What is your favorite sport? Then I repeated it here with what is your favorite video game? We had Ghana up here. And I had it again. So I just repeat it. It's not a big deal because, again, it's not a vocab list. It's just whatever I needed to use. Notice also that I have the present perfect here, ha ido, which is an advanced structure. But all the kids need to know is what it means. So I had to use it in my sentence, so I just wrote what it meant, and I didn't have to tell them that this is a Spanish 3, vocabulary item, or explain the grammar behind it, or say this is the present perfect. I just used it. I told them what it meant, and it's not a big deal. So I just do that all the way through. But you can see what we were talking about and how these words are. And I'm not doing this orally. I'm speaking in Spanish, but I am putting these words up as I go whenever I use them. And they're just words that came up in class. So it's nothing, extremely special. It's just what came up in class, and it made myself be comprehended the whole time. So that's what I'm talking about with that vocabulary list I'm having running. Next, let's go ahead, and again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comments or the chat, whether you're watching it on the replay or you're watching us live. Let's talk about authentic language. You want to find ways to incorporate authentic language into what you're doing. We don't want to talk about instilted phrases or memorized phrases all the time. I remember back in high school when I was taking Spanish, they only really focused on ¿Cómo estás? And ¿Qué tal? And those are two different ways to ask how are you, but there's dozens of ways to do that. And you want to try to incorporate as many of them so kids can understand everybody. They're not just going, I don't understand because you didn't use ¿Cómo estás? And you didn't use ¿Qué tal? The only two that I know. When I went to Spain, nobody says buenos días or buenas tardes. They just say buenas, and it covers everything. And so I was teaching my kids. So when I greet them, I'm just saying buenas, and then they'll ask me about it, and I'll say, well, you know, it covers everything. It covers buenas tardes, buenos días. They just shorten it. It's buenas, and that's what they say. So you want to try to incorporate as much authentic language as you possibly can. Find some slang terms in there. Find some good expressions that might not be in a textbook. There are different ways to say cool. There's, use the rejoinders or other expressions that kids say. A ver is a good one that people use all the time. You want to find ways to incorporate these to make your language more authentic and more real, so it doesn't sound like they learned it from a 1990s textbook. Because, whatever they put in a textbook, it's frozen in time at that decade, and then it's not changeable. But language is a living, breathing thing, and so you want to find ways to bring that authentic language, authentic expressions in. Another example is, no one ever taught me the expression, but I heard a lot of Americans, when I mean Americans, I mean English-speaking Americans, say things like, no puedo esperar, I can't wait. Now, that may be a literal translation, but it's an Anglicism. It's Spanish words for an English phrase. Then I learned the authentic way to say that, no puedo ver la hora. I can't see the hour, the time. That's the expression that native speakers use for that. And so once I learned that, I wanted to incorporate that in my classroom so my kids could learn more authentic language and sound more native-like than using Anglicisms all the time. So it's really, really important. Ways to get that stuff in there is expose your kids to real, authentic resources. Articles, short stories. Novels will probably be too hard if they're written for native speakers by native speakers. But generally articles are written at the 6th, 7th, 8th grade level to make them understandable to the entire population. And that's going to be harder for your kids, but you can work through them with them. And you can do embedded readings, simplifying them before you get to the final version. But it shows them real language. You can also show videos, use YouTube videos. You can slow them down so they're only speaking at 0.75 normal speech. You can put subtitles under there, and I put the subtitles in there not in English. I put the subtitles in there in Spanish so they can see them. And if you have a choice, always use closed captions, because by law, closed captions have to be exactly what is being said for the deaf. Whereas subtitles don't have to be word for word, and sometimes they're just summaries of what's said. They'll be speaking for 5 minutes and only 2 lines come up on the bottom for a subtitle. So use closed captions whenever possible. And then I can work to make that language comprehensible. I can stop it. We can talk about it for a minute, but I want them to hear it this way, and I can point out any particular explanations along the way. I teach middle school, so it's really hard for me to find any Netflix shows in Spanish or any language that are middle school appropriate. It's very difficult. But a lot of high schools will choose a series and they'll watch that series all the way through, maybe once a week. And what's great about that, Netflix has a plugin, just search Netflix language plugin, that goes in and it will put the subtitles, closed captions, but not only in the target language, but also in English. And then you can add words to a vocabulary list by clicking on them and adding them to a vocabulary list. So any cool expressions or slang that you want your kids to learn, you can add them to this list, and then you have this list. And you can show your kids how to get this Chrome extension. It's a Chrome extension that goes with Netflix to do this. So they can watch them at home, and maybe you can assign something small for them to do at home. But it really, really helps. You can slow it down. You can highlight it so they just repeat that phrase so you can hear it and see it and learn the context of it. But it's a great way to learn language. And Netflix is so great because they have titles in a variety of languages, not just Spanish or French. You can find German and other languages as well. And sometimes they're not, they're programs from the actual countries way back when, from over there. And then they're put into English if you want to watch them in English. But then the lips don't match because they originally were German or Spanish or French. But they also have the English shows, and they put them in Spanish and French and German. So there's lots of different varieties. And you can find, if you can't find a series that is from the target language that is school appropriate, you might be able to find one in English that's school appropriate for like lower levels and just put it in the language. That might help as well. So those are some ways of putting everything into authentic language as much as possible. Finding the way to bring the real world language into your classroom so that it doesn't sound like your kids learned language from a textbook, that they learn it from a living, breathing human being. If anybody else has any other ideas on how to bring authentic language into the classroom, please let us know either in the comments or the chat. Had anybody known about that plugin, the little Chrome extension for Netflix to show the language? If so, type in a 1 in the chat. If no, type in a 2 just to let me know if anybody else has heard of that. Let me see if I can look it up right here and find it. Netflix. They changed the name of it recently, so Joanne has not heard of it. Okay, Netflix language Chrome extension. Ah, there it is. I found it right away. So let me I'll put the link in the chat. It's called Language Reactor, and it's a Chrome extension. And so when I think it works also for YouTube as well. I find often the closed captions are very wrong. Sometimes they can be. I noticed a lot, especially with Spanish. If the movie was from Mexico, then the closed captions come from Spain and vice versa, and so they're off sometimes. But this works really, really well. Let me go back and share my screen here. So it does something like this. So this is on YouTube. It has it like, hey, disculpe, ¿por qué querría hablar con ella? Hey, excuse me, why would I want to talk with her? It has them both so they can compare them. Here it is, and what I don't know if I think that might be Korean. It might be Korean or simplified Chinese. I'm not sure, but you can click on it right here. See the word over here, and it shows where it shows up here along the side, and you can save the items along the way. And here's like Rick and Morty. So this is in English, but now they're doing it in German here. So I said any of this, I'll deny, and they'll deny it, and they'll take my side. Ich sagte, irgendwas davon werde ich leugnen, und sie werden meine Seite vertreten. So they can have it right here. You can save your little items along the way. So it's really, really helpful, and it's a free plugin that you can use. And so use that link if you want to do that. And it's also good for you to learn a language too, to either better the language that you teach to get yourself more fluent, or to learn something new. So those are some great ways to put in things to help you with your bringing the authentic language into class. Let me go back. Okay, next let's go ahead and talk about oral interactions. So this is what I call conversations. And this is so integral to what I do in my classroom. It's essential. For the first 4 to 6 weeks of every level I teach, we do nothing but have conversations. I pick a topic and we stick with that topic until I've spoken to every student on that topic. Some days, the student conversation for each student goes maybe 7 minutes, 5 minutes, and it's boring and we move on. But other times, the conversation goes 2 or 3 days because it's so good. And so, like for level 1, I talk about their favorite activity, whether it be a sport or some other activity like reading or skateboarding or playing video games. That's what we talk about. And I start spiraling out because I'll start with just what do you do? What do you like? What's your favorite activity? We talk about it, but then I can add days of the weekend. When did you talk? When do you do it? Do you do it every day or just on the weekends? I can do times. Do you do morning, afternoon, or evenings? Do you do it by yourself or do you do it with friends? Do you do it in the fall, winter, spring, or summer? You see, I can incorporate lots of things in there. And by the time I've spoken to all 34 of my students, 4 to 6 weeks have gone by and it's not wasted time because we've talked about this. I'm adding in lots of other language that's high frequency to talk about, and they're assimilating that language in their brains. For level 2s, we start with fears. What are you afraid of? Because it brings in a wonderful expression in both, all three, Spanish, French, and German all use I have fear rather than I am afraid. And so I can work that in and we can talk about the fears. What do you do when you see this thing that you're afraid of? Or what reactions do you have? Why are you afraid of that? Where are you afraid of that? Etc., etc., etc. So it has lots of great ways to have those conversations. With my level 3s, because they have more language, I can have more open-ended. I'm not so targeted in what I talk about. So I have an open-ended. What did you do over summer vacation? And some people did some really boring things, and so the conversation goes really quick. But other ones, it goes much more richly because of what they talk about. And I don't want anybody to feel bad with summer vacations because I know some families can't afford to do anything or they might not have had the greatest summer vacation. That's fine. I allow them to lie. It does not have to be the actual truth. I just want to be able to have a conversation with them. And when you're talking about things that are what they did over the summer vacation, it's such a wide variety. Some people traveled. Some people hung out with their friends. Some people watched TV or played video games. We had lots of things to talk about. And 4 to 6 weeks go by and we talked about just this one topic. But what's awesome about it, we had lots of vocabulary that came in. Let me show you one of my periods. One of my Spanish 3 period vocabulary. So here, let's go to period 3, which was Spanish 3. Let me go back to my screen share. So right here, you can see I started off with what did you do over the summer? We had Grand Canyon. This one was funny because she said she took a cruise and she said she cruised to the Grand Canyon, which we all know is landlocked in a desert. So we had some fun with that. We talked about going to Las Vegas and eating at the buffets. I don't remember what how coconuts got into the conversation, but it did. We had someone else rode a bicycle. Someone saw a lion. Someone fell. Let's see, what else do we have? We had nightmares in here. We had a pool. How long did they stay? What did they do? Here's one that they fished. And we made a funny story about this one. This girl liked to eat strawberries and chips and salsa together, and it was like, and cheese, and we were like, ew, this is just really gross. Here's where that no podía ver la hora came up in that class, because I want to teach them authentic language. Montaña rusa came up. People were eating churros, espinacas. We had all kinds of things, but look at all the rich vocabulary came up. Oh, this one was funny because someone drew a picture and they didn't have time. We always start with a picture to do this, and someone drew a picture of their friend and them going to the mall, but they didn't have time to draw hair on their friend. So one had hair and one did not. So then I used that to talk about saying, ha ha ha, look, she's bald. She doesn't have any hair. And we've made a funny story about that she went to the wig shop and she had wigs and she had lots of different wigs. So we made a whole big story about that. So you can see all of the different topics that we could talk about, all of this different vocabulary that came up just having conversations with them. And the girl was apposite about the wig, so it came back up over here. We could finish it. She bought 100 different wigs of all different colors. She had a rainbow colors. She didn't want them to get wet because she was swimming to Hawaii. And it took her 101 days to get there. She swam there. So we had lots of different things that we talked about. And all this vocabulary, because they had ways to be able to talk about other things, I could bring all this in. And so it's just a rich way to bring in as much vocabulary through the oral communication, having these conversations. And because they're learning this vocabulary in context, it's sinking in better. And some of it, I don't care if it goes away, because it's not really high frequency. But the stuff that is will naturally just repeat itself over and over again. And so it's a great way to incorporate all of that in there. So as I said, oral interaction is so important. And in my level 3s, I do more of these conversations than I do stories or movie talks because they can. I do them in all my classes, but I start doing less stories in level 3 because we can have these discussions and these conversations, and it's much more authentic. And lastly, cultural connections. So we're not only teaching language, we're teaching culture, but we want to teach culture in context of language. And in Spanish, what I teach, we have 21 Spanish-speaking countries. There's lots of culture that I can incorporate. So I try to find ways to incorporate that culture in. Not just the easy stuff like holidays and food. That's really easy and very superficial. I'm looking at body language stuff, like how many Hispanics will point to their elbow, meaning cheap, codo, because someone is cheap. Or Colombians and other cultures will use their lips to point rather than their fingers. They'll point going like that. Those types of things. I want my kids to understand culture in a way so they don't become the embarrassing or offensive American. Things that we do. I'll talk about how the decimal and comma are reversed, or the month and the day are reversed, which is obvious when you get to days higher than 12, but it's not so obvious when you have 4-1, because is that April 1st or is that the 4th of January? So I want them to understand the differences with the 24-hour clock and how that is used versus the 12-hour clock that we use in America for the most part. Those types of cultural things I want to incorporate. The stuff that is more deep than just the holidays and the food. Don't get me wrong, I do teach the holidays and the food, but I want to teach my kids things that are more deep than that. One of the things we talk about is how Americans are very me-focused and Europeans are very we-focused. They think more about the community than many Americans do. And I know it's a little bit stereotypical. Not all Americans just think about themselves and not all Europeans think about the community. But it's a general philosophy between the two areas, between America and Europe, that is really different, and you can see that. Or the Europeans, they can't stand the way that Americans go and say, so how are you doing? And they don't really stick around to find the answer. And Europeans will only ask that question if they do have time to hear the answer, and they want the real answer. They don't just want fine. It's a conversation they want to have, and they don't understand how us Americans, it's just superficial. You got to say, hey, how are you doing? Fine. Okay, goodbye. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you. And we move on. Where Europeans take the time to have that conversation and to make that connection. So we explain these types of things in this culture because we're teaching them how to be world citizens and not just American citizens, or in our narrow American viewpoints of a lot of different things. A lot of other countries like Germany, for example, are much more environmentally conscious than Americans are. They don't usually have plastic utensils. A lot of them are wooden utensils. I know when I go to there's a French fry shop I love in Berlin where they have gourmet French fries, and they give you little wooden forks to eat them with. Because also in Germany, they don't eat with their hands as much as we do. They don't eat their French fries with their hands like we do. They would use a fork to do it. Or the European style where they don't switch the utensils back and forth. They will put the knife in their right hand and then the fork in their left hand. They cut and then they eat like this. Whereas Americans will cut with their right hand, then they'll swap, put the knife in the right hand, the knife in the left hand, the fork in the right hand, and then eat with their right hand because they're right-handed. So I want to teach them all of these things. Or in many European countries, you don't want to have your hands under the table. It's considered rude because it goes back to the night days. If you had your hand on the table, they didn't know if you were holding a weapon. So your hands must always be above the table. These are the types of cultural interactions I really, really want to teach so that we don't offend when we go someplace else, and we're not offensive, and we are not embarrassing ourselves being a typical American who only thinks about Americans and how Americans do things. So those are 5 different ways to immerse your classroom in the language and create an immersive environment. Does anybody else have any other ideas or comments before we go for today? Remember also to like and subscribe. We are so close to our 1,000. We have 813 subscribers right now. I would like to get to 1,000 before the end of the year. I have something big planned for when we get to that 1,000. So please like and subscribe this video to get it out to more people. Share it with colleagues and people who you think might benefit from this. It would be awesome to get to that 1,000 before the end of the year. Also next week, before I get there, we have our Assessment Academy still going on. If you are not part of that, you can join at mm.us/academy. Our next class is on Sunday. They are recorded, so you can watch all the previous 6 classes. We go through mid-December with the Academy. There's 11 videos, 11 classes total. So if something you're interested in to help up your you are so welcome, Illy. If you want to up your assessment game, you might want to check out the Assessment Academy at mm.us/academy. Now, next week, I'm not going to be live. I'm going to take a week off. In its place, I'm going to do... Joanne says, thank you. I'm happy to finally get here on a Monday night. I'm so happy to have had you, Joanne. But next week, we are going to do a replay, an encore presentation of one of our very popular live streams we did about a year ago. It's going to be on Movie Talk. So it'll still be here, same time, same channel. I just won't be live. You can still put your comments, your questions in there, and I will go back and I will answer them. But you can still watch it. If you didn't watch the first time around, you can watch it the second time around. It's one of our very popular lives that we did in the past year. So if there's no other comments or questions, I wish everybody a wonderful week. And I won't see you next week, but you can still watch the Movie Talk one next week. And I will be back in 2 weeks. Have a great one, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.